decade ago, I encountered what I believe to be one of the most challenging and also one of the most powerful nuggets of wisdom in our Jewish tradition. It is a midrash that connects to our Torah portion this week, Vayeshev. In Vayeshev, we read that Joseph's brothers threw him into a pit. Now, Joseph may have deserved something. He was sort of arrogant, and his brothers may have been justified in giving him his comeuppance, but maybe not throwing him into a pit. Anyway, this midrash tells the story of how years later, after Joseph grows up, he returns to the pit that his brothers threw him into, and he says the blessing that one says over a miracle. Joseph had turned the hardest moment of his life into a blessing. When I first heard this, I didn't think it was relevant to me. Why would I want to turn the worst moments of my life into blessings? Aren't there some things that are just really difficult and we should leave it at that? I initially responded negatively to this message, but it stayed with me for years to come. It sort of became a piece of spiritual work for me. I didn't know how to do it, but I knew with difficulties I encountered in my early 20s, I had to turn these difficult moments of my life into blessings. And so I wondered, how do you do this? I thought about the story of Joseph. What was it that enabled him to achieve this sense of equanimity? The story of Joseph is one of the longest continuous narratives in the Hebrew Bible. He gets a lot of screen time. With all their twists and turns and psychological intrigues, the 13 chapters of the Joseph narrative offer us the opportunity to see the fullness of a human life. Joseph's story begins with Rachel giving birth to him. Joseph quickly becomes his father Jacob's favorite son, and Jacob gives Joseph a colorful cloak. Throughout his life, Joseph is an interpreter of dreams. When he is 17 years old, he interprets his father Jacob's dream and predicts his own success and his 11 brothers' demise, hence the pit. This infuriates his brothers, who decide to then throw him into a pit. After he gets thrown into this pit, his brothers decide to sell him as a slave to merchants, and these merchants take Joseph to Egypt. In Egypt, Joseph experiences many highs and lows, from being imprisoned to eventually becoming Pharaoh's second in command. Joseph's brothers know nothing about this, and they assume he's dead. And in a moment of peak dramatic irony, the brothers come to Joseph during a famine without realizing who he is, and they ask Joseph for help. Joseph's brother Judah gives an impassioned speech, which finally prompts Joseph to reveal who he really is. Then Joseph reconciles with his brothers and reunites with his father Jacob, who is overjoyed to see him. The whole family then moves to Egypt. Joseph lives to 110, which I'd say is pretty good for our times, but only decent by biblical standards. The descendants of Joseph, otherwise known as the Israelites, thrive and multiply in Egypt, which leads us into the book of Exodus. If we take a step back, Joseph shares the basic condition of most characters in the Hebrew Bible, and maybe the same human condition we all share. He is at the whim of forces he can't control, as well as a complicated interplay of his foibles and his admirable qualities. Joseph certainly has his flaws, one of which is his arrogance as seen in his sense of superiority over his brothers. But another aspect of Joseph's disposition really struck me as I thought about it. Throughout his story, the biblical narrative indicates in various ways that Joseph is a very emotional person. When Joseph first sees his brother Benjamin in Genesis chapter 43, he is so overcome by emotion that he runs back to his room to cry. After Judah pleads on behalf of Benjamin, Joseph is again overcome by emotion. He sends everyone except his brothers out of the room. The Hebrew then gives a sense of how emotional he becomes. Velo yechol Yosef lehitapek. This literally means, and Joseph couldn't hold himself back. He then reveals his true identity to his brothers, and he sobs so loudly it says that all of Mitzrayim could hear him. The Hebrew here is ambiguous. It could refer to either the Egyptians in the palace or to all of Egypt. Either way, Joseph is crying very loudly. I wonder whether this quality of being so impassioned is a key to what allows Joseph to understand the worst moments of his life as a miracle. Joseph deeply expresses his sentiment. He feels a release. In millennial or perhaps Gen Z speak, he feels his feels. His capacity to truly say and feel his emotions helps him to process what has happened to him. This, in turn, allows him to come to peace with his experiences. This is consistent with various models of pastoral care that I've learned about. When we express our deeply held feelings in a safe and loving environment, we are able to feel a sense of release. This letting go of our emotions can then enable us to understand our lives differently. It seems that throughout his life, Joseph does something similar. By letting out his emotions, by expressing himself, he is processing what is happening. Joseph is then able to gain a new perspective on his life. Surely this formula will not work for every person in every case. Some of our experiences are so challenging, it simply isn't possible to conceive of them as miracles. Some of the pits we get thrown into are really that deep. And yet I wonder if even in many cases, Joseph's approach of emotional release can help us. When we feel comfortable and safe, we can take advantage of opportunities to express what is most urgent to us. This act of conveying what we find most important can allow us to move through the difficulties of life and then to create new narratives about our lives. Then, gradually, we can transform our wounds into wisdoms, our pits into miracles. Shabbat Shalom.